Hello, and welcome to Hyper Light Drifter, an action-adventure game by Heart Machine, released just last month, although it's been in development for almost 3 years, I believe, following a really successful Kickstarter. It's a mix of, well, lovely pixel art and chiptunes, obviously, which is why I'm interested in it, as well as a kind of Dark Soulsy meets Fez kind of vibe. You play as this little guy here called the Drifter, who's exploring this kind of apocalyptic sci-fi world, beating up all of its inhabitants in search for something. The plot's actually told more or less without words, apart from, I believe, just tutorial hints. So it's obviously open to interpretation, although I think the Kickstarter mentions that you have a disease which you're seeking to find a cure for in this deserted apocalyptic town. This video is actually going to be played on New Game Plus mode so that I can show you some of the areas as you first experience them, which means I'm probably going to die a lot because I only have 2 health points, so apologies in advance, but hopefully they'll make you understand just how punishing this game can be at times. We're going to be exploring the eastern part of the world. The game's split into 4 segments: north, east, west and south. Initially you have access to north, east and west, and then south unlocks once you've completed those 3. Although you never really complete an area before you move on. Your only requirement is that you access at least 4 of the 8 kind of activatable glyphs that we're going to find, hopefully one of them, in the world. And once you've activated 4 of them, you can move on to another region. Although that almost certainly requires finishing the final boss. Along your way, you meet people who tell you stories in these little visual vignette things. They often hint at things like bosses you might encounter, the history of the world, stories that might have affected some of the things that you'll find as you explore. In particular, this area has a gigantic frog as its final boss, which is what that was a picture of. Hyper Light Drifter's combat is quite fast and based on a lot of... there's some dexterity and there's some timing. There's no way to block necessarily, but there are some abilities that you can get as upgrades that allow you to do things which are kind of like blocking. For instance, you can deflect certain projectiles with your sword, you can dash through them, which makes you immune to projectiles while you're doing it. So although you're never explicitly shielding yourself from an attack, there are lots of ways that you can mitigate damage. Drifting, which is this thing that I'm doing here to cross gaps, is really integral to a lot of Hyper Light Drifter's combat, a lot of its secrets, a lot of its mechanics in general. One of the optional upgrades, which is so useful it's kind of hard to imagine it being optional, is the ability to chain dashes together, which make you extremely fast and extremely mobile. I'm also extremely bad at it, but hopefully I'll be able to show you some of it in this game at least. As you move through the world, you get these little scripted sequences, like the one that we had earlier where we met that enemy, but also that reveal things like the extent of the player character's illness, and small bits of information about other players in the world. Although a lot of these levels can look linear, many of them have hidden areas. So this path branches off here, and what we found is actually one of the glyphs that we need to activate in order to complete an area. So completing each one pops up this little icon that shows us that we're in the eastern region right now, and we've unlocked the first of the glyphs in this region. It's actually going to show us a little preview of the central kind of progress indicator in town that will show us how far we are towards unlocking the final boss. This secret you could kind of see from the main path, that there were other places you could get to. We'll see hopefully later on an example of secret areas that are harder to get to. Hyper Light Drifter has a reputation for being a difficult game, and that's a reputation that it deserves, I think. It certainly is hard, and it's hard in lots of different ways. When people talk about difficulty in games, especially games like this that channel Dark Souls, people mostly think about combat difficulty. The combat certainly requires a lot of different skills, and it demands a lot of the player. And you'll probably see me taking a lot of damage in a lot of these fights, and with only 2 health points I imagine you'll also see me restarting a lot as well. There's a fight coming up now which I'm actually bad at even when I have 6 health points. But although the combat's difficult, I wouldn't say that that's the only way in which this game is hard or even hostile to the player. Currently, having finished the game once, my main interest when playing is looking for secrets, although I'm not for the purposes of this video, because looking for secrets is an extremely tedious process. The way that secrets are hidden in Hyperlight Drifter varies. Some of them are just tucked away through alternate paths, others require you to hug every single wall just in case there's something hiding behind it. And some are even more obnoxious than that. Oof, I'm glad I got through that. Hopefully we'll see an example of all of these different kinds of secrets later on in this video. As you can see, the level design is actually quite nice. It does a good job of hiding the fact that Hyperlight Drifter is more or less split up into distinct arenas. So as I walk into this room, we're going to see that the walls behind me are going to close and I'm going to be stuck in a small area to fight these guys. Now these guys do a lot of damage, as you could just see, so I've been insta-gibbed. Fortunately in Hyperlight Drifter you tend to restart relatively close to where you died. Not always, and I've just realised I haven't picked up the gun yet, so this is going to make this encounter very difficult indeed, and I might actually need to go to a different part of the world. We'll see how it goes. Not bad, except now there's 3 or 4 more of them, I think. I actually think this is where Hyperlight Drifter is at its absolute best. In these kind of small arena engagements where you're forced to face a bunch of monsters together, often with overlapping abilities. I think I'm going to have one more go at this fight and then I might just move to another area, just to spare you the horror of having to watch me attempt this multiple times. The reason why is that this game kind of has a bunch of different... oh lord, yeah, okay. We'll go north, I think. I've shown you a little bit of this locale, we'll go north for this one. So the reason why I don't think it does as good a job is that... So there's kind of 3 broad types of encounter in Hyperlight Drifter. There are very small encounters where you just fight a couple of enemies, and these are really good often for teaching the player about how a type of enemy works. They're also really good for allowing the player... They're kind of like... They're sources of pace, I guess, through the game is the best way of putting them. So they give the player some downtime. It keeps them active, but they're kind of a minor encounter. So for instance, these little guys drop down. They're one-hit kills. They're not really very annoying, but they just add some pace and texture to travelling through the world. Then there are these larger encounters that I just mentioned, where you're fighting multiple enemy types at once, and we're going to see one of those in a minute. And this is where you get interplay between different characters, and you get an idea of the synergy, you have to think slightly about your strategy, and these are by far the most interesting encounters. Probably the worst kind of encounter are the extreme high-end boss battles, which it generally only has one of per stage, but there are some kind of exceptional mini-boss areas where you fight an exceptionally strong, unique monster in an area that isn't necessarily an end-of-game fight. So this is what I consider a kind of small encounter where it's trying to teach you about how an enemy works. So these birds dive towards you. They can't be killed unless they're diving, which means the only way you can kill them is if they're a danger to you. If you've talked to me about Hyperlight Drifter before watching this video, then I've probably moaned at you about the boss battles already. I think they're really bad. I do tend to think the boss battles are bad in general, but I think they're particularly bad in Hyperlight Drifter because the game actually has a really nice flow to its exploration. You're constantly pressing forwards, and even a difficult room usually only takes a few attempts to get right. But boss battles can take me anything up to 15 minutes to complete. Some of them, certainly the final boss, feel like they take even longer. And it's not that I object to that as a bad game design, although I kind of think it is. But it's just that it interrupts the feeling of moving around this place and constantly seeing new things and new rules and new systems, which is what Hyperlight Drifter excels at. The bosses tend to be laser focused on pushing you through the same kind of challenge again and again and again. a lot of the games that Hyper Light Drifter cites as inspiration, or that other people have said that it is clearly inspired by, are games like Dark Souls or the original Zelda, which are not necessarily the most obvious comparisons to one another, but what I think they certainly share in mind is that they're both linearly designed games, in that if you can't complete a challenge, it's quite hard to get past that challenge without mastering it in some way. There's no optional path to go down, although I guess there are in some cases in Dark Souls. I think that's my understanding of it anyway. You pretty much need to master a boss in Zelda, or you may not be able to complete the dungeon to get the tool that it has in order to move further on in the game. Although, like Hyper Light Drifter, there might be alternative routes you could take down. At some point you're going to have to master this rule set. One thing I realised playing Hyper Light Drifter, though, is that actually there are a bunch of hard and difficult games that I like playing, and they're actually not that much easier than Hyper Light Drifter is. Spelunky is a good example, Risk of Rain is another. They're not difficult in the same way that Hyper Light Drifter is, but they have a lot in common with it. And it made me think about why that is. And even though I don't want to sound like a broken record here, although I certainly am at this point, I think a big part of it is that they are procedurally generated, first of all, and also that they derive from roguelikes rather than other kinds of game. The reason why I think that's important is that Hyper Light Drifter wants you to repeatedly attempt a problem until you get good at it. And this is something which Spelunky's designer Derek Yu explicitly tried to deal with when he designed Spelunky. And the way Spelunky got around it was using procedural generation and using ideas from roguelikes to make the player feel like they were attempting a different challenge even though they were learning and practicing the same skills. The room I'm about to go into here, when I first played it I died on it multiple times. And the problem was that I resented re-attempting it, not because I wasn't learning anything, because I probably was, because the problem presented itself in exactly the same way every time I tried it. It became boring to me. It shut off the part of my brain that makes me want to learn a task, and I began to look for shortcuts and ways out. And I think it's telling that most of the bosses in Hyper Light Drifter I finished through either cheesing them or finding some kind of exploit strat that let me kill them faster. Now that might be a reflection more on me as a player than this game, because clearly a lot of people like this game. But I think there is something to be said for designing games in such a way that they, I guess, respect the player's time, which is a phrase that I don't always agree with, but I think in this case is worth bringing up. Because a lot of the time I feel like Hyper Light Drifter doesn't respect my time. Not just in the way it makes me repeat the same combat encounter, but in the way it hides its secrets around blind corners and through leaps of faith that there's no possible way I could reasonably have foreseen. I feel like it wastes my time with tests of skill which are unreasonably large in scale. So if you've played the game, you might have seen the Chain Drifts challenge, which requires you to perform 100 chain drifts in a row in order to unlock a particular item, which I managed to eventually do, but the second tier of that challenge is to complete 800 of them in a row. And obviously it's not exactly that you don't have to do that to finish the game. You don't even have to do that if you just want to play Hyper Light Drifter and see the world. But just the fact that it's there makes me ask whether this game is even remotely aimed at me. And perhaps it's not. I don't want to say that I didn't enjoy my 10 hours with it. And I think the problem was that most of the time that I spent on Hyper Light Drifter was me thinking about why games like it caused me problems. And I guess approaching the end of my time with the game, what I think about more is my problems with the people who fetishize these kinds of encounters rather than the people that make these games themselves. Because I think Hyper Light Drifter is actually a pretty good game in a lot of ways. It's beautiful, it's very affecting and atmospheric, and I kind of wish it was twice as big as it was so I could keep on exploring it forever. But there are also times when I wanted to put it away and never play it ever again. Which is true of a lot of good games, but I think it didn't need to be true of Hyper Light Drifter if it had maybe taken a different approach. Anyway, that's Hyper Light Drifter. You should definitely play it if you like action games, but you should be prepared to be a little bit frustrated at times. And maybe you won't finish it, and maybe that's okay, because you'll probably still get a lot from it, even if some of its challenges make you end up quitting and uninstalling. I think the 3 or 4 hours you'll spend before you reach your particular stopping point will still be time well spent. Anyway, thanks very much for watching. I don't know what is next on the docket. I think possibly Hitman. Maybe Hitman. We'll see. I might wait for the next mission to be out so I can play one fresh. But yeah, thanks very much for watching, and I will see you next time.